Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. I'll start off with this map. This is from NASA. This is the Earth at night. All the lights you see is what we define ourselves to be civilized areas of the planet. The bulk of humanity lives in those lights, and you can see it you can see outskirts of Japan. Europe is lit up, parts of Latin America, and the US is lit up. We use about 75 billion barrels of oil equivalent per year to maintain this dazzling array of lights. Just to give a sense of how much the scale is of what we're doing to maintain this civilization. So if you go back 150 years, there are no lights at all. The purpose of the talk today is to bring into balance what we mean by biological life and what we mean by socioeconomic life. So we live in socioeconomic time for ourselves, yet we're a biological unit. So what that does is we have to look at the two curves of these two systems. So the biologic curve is sublineal, meaning it's finite. It rises 25% below 1, which means, if I may, this is a better way of seeing it. So the slope of this curve is less than 1. What this means is as things get bigger, they gain economies of scale. So you have a mouse here all the way up to an elephant. You have the metabolic rates, and then you have the body mass. So as we're getting bigger and bigger, biologic units become more and more efficient. Now, that is not true for a socioeconomic unit. A socioeconomic unit is exponential. So if you just look at the two curves, you have a biologic unit which is finite and it's sublineal, and you have a socioeconomic unit that is exponential. And why is it exponential? Why is it open-ended? Because we have defined our growth paradigm to be open-ended. We always want more growth. In order to achieve that more growth, you have to take an energy system and you have to multiply it by the monetary system. So the current model for socioeconomic growth is some surplus energy system, and that's made up of fossil fuels currently, 86%, and then 14% other. And then you're essentially multiplying that by our current monetary system. And what is our current monetary system today? It's a system based on credit. And what is credit? Credit is a method of delaying payment. Simply means I'm not going to be paying you today. I'm going to service the debt. I'm going to consume the amount that I've borrowed, and I'm going to go forward. And economic growth is defined by simply what we are consuming. So I'll go down here and explain. Today, consumption is the key driver to our economic growth. So 70% of developed economies are based on consumption, about 50% in the developing world, but they're moving towards that 70% level. What allows us to consume today? Credit. So all we're doing is borrowing the money, consuming it today, and just paying interest on it going forward. The key is, how do we balance this finite curve of biology with an infinite curve of socioeconomic growth that we ourselves have defined? So if you've seen the slope of the line here, this is the same, but a curve of life, meaning we essentially have a lot of growth. The growth flattens out, and then it's finite, and we come to an end. That's why our parents tell us, trees don't grow to the sky. There's a finite ending to them. That is not true for socioeconomic growth, and I'm going to just swarm. So socioeconomic growth over the last 150 odd years runs through multiple definitions. And these definitions change over time. Energy systems change over time, monetary systems change over time. So I've just put up 3. You could fill this up with many other names. So I've put up the sort of the big names that I think are relevant. First one is Adam Smith. Adam Smith's classical economic growth model is factors of production, land, capital, and natural resources. That's what drives the economy. For Adam Smith, government spending was a negative. So he would subtract from his formula government spending. Fast forward 150 odd years, you get Simon Kuznets in the 1940s. And Simon Kuznets is the father of what everybody here hears the press and policymakers using, gross domestic product, GDP. And he defined GDP is consumption plus investments. Now it's plus government spending. It's no longer a negative. Plus net exports. Very different than Adam Smith. What's missing there is there's no talk of money. The next person I put there is Mike Milken. Mike Milken is founder of a firm called Drexel that no longer exists. And he wrote this formula, what he believes to be human progress. And human progress for him was human capital, everybody sitting in this room, social capital, that's your police, your political system, your health system, plus real assets, that is if you own land, timber, oil, all added up together and multiplied by financial engineering or financial technology. And financial technology is the ability to change the capital structure. So are you using bonds? Are you using equities? What sort of capital are you using? So technology, financial technology is the leverager in the system we are in today. So this system has been in operation since 1971. Internally, it's very hard to calculate human capital, social capital, and real assets. The simpler way of doing it is you just look at what is the total energy that you're using. That's your TPES is total primary energy surplus, and then the current monetary system you're in, which is what I'll go and define again. And the reason to define socioeconomic growth is how we have viewed socioeconomic growth is we need exponential continuous growth year on year. So we need a constant rate of growth all the time, and that sets up an exponential curve. In terms of what that curve is multiplying, which is your energy system, here's a chart where the brown is biomass, which is wood. Suddenly we have fossil fuels come in. That's coal to begin with. That's the orange line. Then you see the green is the oil, and the red is natural gas. I've taken this to 2040. I know there's a gentleman in this room who will say that yellow should be a lot bigger, and he could be right. Even if it's doubling, it'll just get to the size of the blue. So even by 2040, even if we have renewables come into huge success, which means they're doubling every few years in size, the scale is such that it only will make up 10 or 12% of the energy system we use. And this excludes the fact that we'll be growing. This is assuming that we're going to have a stasis of growth. But if that's not the case, then the yellow in relation to the growth will not be as fast. In effect, even 10 years out or 20 years out, we have a system that is primarily a fossil fuel system. And the fossil fuel system, unlike wood, which is also fossil fuel, has an embedded leverage in it. And the embedded leverage of the fuel is essentially what we used to use until we relied on the monetary system to kick in because we had taken as much leverage out of energy as possible. And that is your calorific value of energy. So how dense is the energy that you're using? So if you go from wood to coal, you essentially double, and then you do another double when you go from coal to oil. So that used to be our key driver. The leverage used to come from energy. The leverage now comes from the monetary system, not so much from our energy system. And so what is the monetary system? So in the last, if I just go back, last 150 years, we have three core energy systems. So we go from biomass to coal, coal to oil, and we're transitioning now to more and more natural gas. And the renewables portion of it is growing. But we're still transitioning into the third fossil fuel system, which is natural gas. And unlike the previous three, natural gas is not very energy dense, meaning you need more money to make the system be as productive. So you're not getting the same leverage out of your energy system as you used to, and we're relying more and more on natural gas. There have been 5 monetary systems in the last 150 years. We're currently in the 5th. And you can define a monetary system by saying, what is international money? So where is money accepted everywhere? So prior to 1971, gold was international money. It was accepted everywhere, and it was your final means of payment. So international money is your final means of payment, and there's usually one. And we can go back. It used to be the pound in the early 1900s. Today, it's the dollar. What I've put in there is the US Treasury. So that's international money. That settles all final trades. Everyone has domestic money. So that's the money we all use to settle our payments. What was credit in the 4th system? It was all coming out of banks prior to 1971. Today, credit is not made in banks. It is made in the marketplace. And there is a big difference because the banks can only create so much leverage. The market system can create much more leverage. In the past, the capital account is closed, meaning you could not take money out of the UK prior to 1975. So everybody here is used to just put money in their pocket and go. Well, before then, they would stop you and say, you can't leave, the money cannot leave here. So capital account was closed, capital account is open, huge difference. And the trade used to be managed, meaning you had a lot of tariffs, and now it's global. So we're living in the 5th monetary system, and the key of that system is it's based on market-based credit, and it's global. And this post-1971 period can be divided into 2 periods. One is a hybrid period, where interest rates are much more relevant, and the current period we're in, where the collateral or the asset is much more relevant. So it's not the money that is charged on the asset that's relevant, but the asset itself is relevant. And the asset is, for instance, everybody here has heard of possibly quantitative easing, where the central banks have created lots and lots of assets for the marketplace, but essentially they're using that asset as a collateral to go in the marketplace for further borrowing. So just to round up what is money, it's based on credit. And what's credit? It's a promise to pay sometime in the future. How do you value that promise? It's through finance. It's my field, number of people in here, it's their field. It's the ability to set a daily price for those promises. And that's an asset price. So you hear stock market, bond market, foreign exchange market. That's a price for a future promise. And then how do you settle? How do you pay for that promise? Is through what kind of money. So if you made international promises, you have to pay them through dollars. If you've made local promises, you have to pay them through pounds. If you live in South Africa, you have to pay your promises through rands. And it's the interplay between the promise, how you're valuing it, and how you're settling it is a monetary system. So you take that, and then you multiply that by the energy system, and you get an exponential function. So the monetary system is essentially an exponential function multiplied by an energy system. It continuously needs to grow. And when it doesn't grow, this orange line is the total credit in the United States since 1971. It starts off at $1 odd trillion, and that is government borrowing, household borrowing, corporate borrowing, state and local borrowing, all the borrowings that the Americans make. In 1971 was about 1.5 odd trillion. Today that number is 68 trillion. So I'll repeat that. It's gone from 1.5 to 68 trillion. And if you see that little bubble, that's the financial crisis. So the financial crisis means that credit did not grow. The system requires growth, and when it doesn't grow, it gives you a crisis. And the results of that is when you increase the credit, we go back to that, how do you make GDP? In our system, the leverage comes from the monetary system. So that black line is GDP. And the green line is the Living Planet Index. Is the reason I actually got involved with synchronicity is when my colleague here, Adam Sweden, showed me this chart of the Living Planet Index coming down. I said, goodness me, that looks like exactly the opposite of the credit system. And the Living Planet Index is by ZSL. It's an index of terrestrial, marine life, all put together, and that's lost about half its value since 1971. And if we continue on a very simple rate of growth, this very simple exponential function, which is a growth rate of only 4% a year, which isn't huge, which is that dotted orange line, it just means that the Living Planet Index will lose another half of its value. Most environmentalists throw up this curve. It's called the Kuznets curve, and this is made by the same guy that made GDP. And the Kuznets curve, which is on the left, says as you get richer, first you destroy the environment, and then you reach a point of being very rich that you start saving the environment. And he wrote this in the mid-1960s. They still quote this and they still teach this, but we're in a scientific society, we should apply some science, we have 50 plus years of data. Does this curve hold? And no, it does not. On the right side, you see, yes, we get wealthier, the curve doesn't bend. We get wealthier and we just consume more stuff. So this curve will not bend. We will continue seeing this light dotted line on the green side going down if that dotted line in orange continues going up. And what does this mean when we try to make economic growth? That means we're trying to order nature. So the second law of thermodynamics comes into play, which is entropy, which is if you're going to create order, you're going to create disorder at the same time, because energy is not being destroyed, it's just ending up somewhere else. And in our case, with an exponential monetary system and an exponential consumption system based on that, means we create lots and lots of waste. Because it's entropy, it's not going anywhere. And where does it end up? It ends up in ocean acidification, it ends up in terrestrial declines, forests, it ends up in your fresh water. These are all subcategories of the Living Planet Index. and it ends up in your marine life. Essentially, you're losing half your value over this time as you consume more based on credit. So credit is essentially, the monetary system is an exponential curve. And Malthus, who's another economist around the same time in the 1700s, had this famous J curve that he would show, and then you can't continue doing that and you hit collapse. Malthus was wrong because he figured he did not appreciate innovation or disruption in this viewpoint. So each time we have a J curve, which is what we've been having, so I've color-coded them just for simplicity's sake. So each one is an energy system, and each J curve, as it comes up, you'll notice they get closer and closer. So what we have been doing for the last 150 years is, as we go up the J curve, we have a reset. We jump onto a new J curve through innovation, whether that's going from biomass to coal, whether we're going from coal to oil, where we're now going from oil to natural gas. And we could go, there's a gentleman sitting here who the yellow curve is for, and we could go into alternatives. It's going to occur. But what this does not address, each innovation doesn't address our consumption, because embedded in those J curves is a different monetary system. So we've had our current monetary system for 5 odd decades. It comes with the same reset as your J curve coming to an end. So there's going to be some form of reset. So the easiest example I could come up with is, imagine if you're driving an F1 car and you're going super fast. Credit, based on credit, means that you remove the brakes because it's exponential. You've got your foot on the accelerator, and now you have to jump into another accelerating F1 car. And you have to continuously do this every time, each time your J curve is coming up. And this is put up against the curve on the right, which is us and all other forms of life, because we participate in, we're part of nature. So our curve is finite. Our curve comes to an end. It's sublineal, meaning that we don't grow to the sky. We don't add 4% of growth a year to ourselves unless we're growing this way. So it's, while the socioeconomic system we've created around us is based on only exponential growth, only credit, and it is infinite. So we have the finite versus the infinite. And we've created the infinite. It's not like anyone else has told us to do that. We've done that because we wish to consume more. We wish to be moving up in our consumption for all kinds of material goods. So we have a choice. So we can remain on the current growth model, which is based on credit, primarily fossil fuels, and innovation. And we pat ourselves back on innovation, and we should. But that innovation is for more growth. So my suggestion is maybe the incentive structure should be on efficiency, not on growth. That we shouldn't be getting paid for only growing. We should be getting more value if we're more efficient. Right now, the incentive structure throughout society, and I see there's students here. So when you're a student, you're told to be very efficient. You work, to deadlines, to schedules, and you try to put your time to best use. When you come into working life, it's all about growth. It's not about efficiency. So perhaps the reward structure, A, needs to change. And B, if we don't change the credit system and the consumption system, we're going to end up leaving chunks of society, and we're already seeing that in the politics. So whenever you hear a lot of slogans, my background is financial history. So whenever you hear slogans, that's usually not a good thing. You shouldn't be hearing "Take Back Control" or "America First" or the slogans everywhere these days. So that means that they're not able to come up with the anxiety that exists in society for a chunk of it being left behind, and the biological life doesn't have a hope in hell. We stay on this system. So we have to think, where should we focus? And I said we should focus on efficiency, but the key thing to tackle is how do you balance an infinite monetary system with a finite biological system? So you actually have to address the denominator, which is money, which is credit, and you cannot let credit be infinite, although it gives us a glorious standard of living. And if we do not have credit tomorrow, no new credit is created tomorrow for a year, what would occur? The entire machine would come to a grinding halt. So you can run the negative experiment to see how dependent we are on credit for the structure that we've created for our own socioeconomic growth. And this, by reducing credit, it has a huge effect on society. And that effect is everybody here who has assets, because you have assets and liabilities. So if you reduce liabilities, which is credit, guess what happens to asset prices? They all also come down, which would be a resetting of a massive societal structure. But that's the choice we will have to make going forward. So if we wish to have some living planet index left, we want that curve not to go down but to flatten out. The main thing to address is you'll have to address the credit system. And the biggest makers of credit is government and central banks. They're the ones that really are the primary collateral on which all other forms of credit is created. So unless we balance our finite sublineal biologic life versus our socioeconomic self-created growth paradigm based on credit, then we should not be surprised if nature is gone. And we in fact, that would be a given. So, for me, the main thing to address historically is the means to change the denominator. If we don't change the denominator, which is credit, we're unlikely even to take the first step towards altering any structure. So even if that yellow bar, let's say, miraculously that entire 2040 becomes alternative energy, it will not change one iota in our consumption paradigm. We will still have the same monetary system. We'll have a very efficient energy system, and Jevons paradox, which is the more efficient you get, the more stuff you're going to consume, comes into play. So it's not people rail on the fossil fuels. I don't rail on the fossil fuels because we're a fossil fuel civilization. It's the scale of fossil fuels that's the issue. And what allows the scale? So the question is, what allows us to scale up this system? So if we had no credit, how much fossil fuels would we consume? And I can guarantee you it would be a whole heck of a lot less. So it's the denominator, not the numerator. That's the issue. And we have created the denominator since 1971 to be infinite. We have this curve. This is repeated for every country. The UK, Germany, China, everyone has the same curve. some going faster, some going a little slower. So when you create this much liabilities, it is not a surprise that assets go up at the same time. So from 1971, a house price, it's going to fit somewhere between that black line and that orange line. So if you don't create credit, you don't get asset prices going up. But it's credit that's allowed us to continue the model we have today, and it provides us the current standard of living. So the choice is, we maintain this, you'll get that dotted line coming down. If we choose to restrain it, then that dotted line's rate of drop will decrease accordingly. And whether or not we do that is probably left to most of the people here in the room to have that discussion with. So with that, I think I'll take questions.